Is how a company is valued on the stock market by investors. Once again, there's theories that think that there might be a positive effect by gender diversity on this and a negative. Both also because of the theories that I spoke about before, why a company might actually do better with more gender diversity. Thereby, a corporation also has a certain reputation and they present themselves in a certain way. In this case, I looked at how companies present themselves on Twitter regarding gender inclusivity. And I see and I observe if companies present themselves as gender equal when they are actually not gender diverse. This I do, like I said, on what then was still called Twitter. With 42 listed firms, I check their presentation on gender equality and the gender diversity of managers. And I find that the gender diversity of managers indeed has a positive effect on market valuation, and that firms are punished when they present themselves as gender inclusive when they in reality are not gender diverse. Additionally, although less severely, firms are also punished when they are gender diverse, but when they do not present this. So, to conclude, studying gender diversity requires a consideration of hierarchies, inequalities in firms. Gender composition in occupations affects wage, and this is not explained by specialization of men. The gender diversity leaky pipeline and the culture of gender diversity affects corporate financial performance, and gender diversity in firms does not affect employee well-being. I think that this is probably mostly explained to the last part, because other studies show that gender diversity does influence employee well-being, that I cannot check this on a team level, but only on a firm level. And gender diversity has a positive influence on market valuation, and gender washing is punished. I just find support, general support for the business case for gender equality. Thank you. I return the word to you, Director.
Thank you so much for your presentation. The opposition will now be opened by Professor Sally Wyatt, Professor of Digital Cultures at Maastricht University.
Thank you, Pro-Rector. Dear candidate, dear Joey, as the first member of the committee to speak, let me congratulate you on a very well-written, empirically rich, and methodologically innovative PhD thesis. And the good news is that it addresses an extremely important topic. The bad news is that it is a topic that my younger self had hoped we wouldn't need to still be talking about. But my younger self was overly optimistic about all sorts of things, particularly when it comes to the position of women in society, and particularly the position of women in the labor market. My younger self did, however, learn very quickly that having a room of one's own, to quote Virginia Woolf, is very important, and even more important, an income of one's own is rather important to pay for the room. Financial independence is a good thing. My question is related to other news, and it's a bit mixed. So yesterday, you may have read, the LNVH, the Dutch network of women professors, to give it its English name, presented its annual monitor of the state of women, the position of women in Dutch universities. So I want to ask you to apply what you learned during your thesis to help me make sense of this latest monitor of the position of women in universities. So the percentage of women in women professors in Dutch universities is now 27.6%, an increase of 0.9% since last year, the lowest growth rate in 8 years. At this rate, we'll see gender parity in 2045. Now, as you also note in your thesis, the proportion of women students at universities is very high. It's above 50%, and has been for quite a long time. But it's still the case that women, the leaky pipeline, women don't reach senior levels, are more likely to work part-time, all the things that we know not only in universities. And UM, for those of you who are not here, is still in second place, and FASOS, where you've done your PhD, is at 50%, which is the poster child for gender parity in Dutch universities. So my question for you is really, should we be careful what we wish for? If we eventually reach half of all professors being women, what will happen to university pay? Anyway, I think academic pay has declined in real terms over the past decades. And is that, do you think, a result of there being more women in universities, of academia becoming feminized to some extent as a profession? Now, Dutch universities don't operate on the stock market, but could we also explain the perhaps declining reputation of universities as a result of the growing proportion of women? Or is my older self just being overly pessimistic? So I look forward to your answer.
Thank you. And dear highly esteemed opponent, a very interesting question. I think that if we look through my theoretical understanding, that indeed the feminization of the profession of academic will contribute to a depressing in wages and potentially also prestige, which also comes from other studies that look more on this. How that all will evolve is, of course, I cannot say with the theories that I have studied and the empirical matter that I have studied, as does not happen in a vacuum, obviously. There's also a lot of theories talking about academia generally being of less prestige nowadays, following more accessible education. So that also different classes have reached academia. So if there's only feminization, I do not know. But I definitely think that studies show that this is partially the case. But once again, also because it doesn't happen in a vacuum, also the question is, as all occupations feminize, there's also, how will that relate then to each other? That's my answer.
Thank you. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Dr. Tanja van der Lippe online. She holds a chair in Sociology of Households and Employment Relations at Utrecht University.
Dear candidate, dear Joey, first I would like to congratulate you with your PhD thesis. I found it a pleasure to read your thesis. You address a very important research topic, the impact of gender equality in the workplace on employments and firms in the Netherlands. I like the setup of the book, where you pay attention to the background of the problem and introduce feminist perspectives before you enter the empirical chapters. I also admire the way you have made use of register data and national representative surveys of Statistics Netherlands. You show a great interest in the methodological issues and dealt with them with great care in your thesis. So yes, my compliments. Of course, there are still questions to be answered, and one of my questions I would like to ask you is about Chapter 4, where you studied the consequences of gender diversity for the firm and its employees. You were surprised that you didn't find an effect for employees, nor for their burnout, sick leave, satisfactions, etc., etc. I do see that you recommend to have more information on the team level. That would be an improvement, I would say. But first, I would like to go one step back with you, because I was not surprised so much that you didn't find anything, because I didn't expect an effect immediately. I looked it up in the literature. So, for example, the Repchuk and Young paper you make use of in your thesis, and they show that when you are, as a woman, in a more feminine occupation, that matters, but only in interaction with, for example, being female. So the effect of gender diversity is dependent on your own situation, but this is not what you test. You are focusing on macro level effects, things that are happening at the level of the organization for gender diversity or the gender wage gap in general in the organization. And then you also add the interactions between these macro level variables. But your outcome variable is at the individual level of the employee. So I thought cross-level interactions between the macro and the micro level could have helped. I have a number of questions about this, but I would like to start with the first question, and that is, why did you expect an effect at all at the individual level? Thank you.
Thank you. Dear Heliestine Poon, thank you for your interesting question. I expected an effect on the individual level following existing research that indeed people tend to be have lower scores on these well-being outcomes when they are in an occupation that is mostly the other gender. So as I control for gender, and I also have, although not in the thesis, I have done the analyses based separate for men and women. I, however, find no effects there as well. So the expectation is that as women will prefer with other women, they will have less benefit of working in a more diverse company. Also, which is also not in the thesis, I indeed did checks on this to see if that would also go further than diversity. So because diversity is 50-50, so does that effect do exist? If it goes further than that they are really in a male-dominated or a really female-dominated occupation. And I do not find that effect as well. Also, there are indications based on different theories that people actually prefer working in diverse or at least better performing companies. So I think that there are, although it is not very established, this is relatively new research, I think there are definitely indications to expect also individual level outcomes.
Okay, can I follow up with this?
Yes, of
I'm
course.
looking at the chair.
We do have a problem.
Okay, thank you so much.
Can I tell you something? We do have a problem with your microphone a bit. There's an echo. So if you move your head, I think we hear a lot of echo. So yeah, we just have to be careful. But Joey understood your question very well. So
I'm sorry.
yeah, just.
I will remain very still now. So now assume that you agree with me that it could have been nice to add cross-level interactions. And you already said you did some of them. And a cross-level interaction, for example, is the gender diversity interacted with, for example, the educational level, the occupational status. Could you argue what kind of cross-level interactions could be important here to address?
I do not see direct theoretical expectations of why educational level would interact with the gender diversity of a company. But I understand the reason to control for these different macro level interactions. I do think as we control for companies and sectors and also wage of individuals, we generally look within certain strata of educational level. Yeah, we also control for educational level, but I do understand the idea behind it. I think that it's definitely an interesting avenue for future research, which I might undertake myself. I went here for consistency over depth in this, to look at both companies and employees. But I do think that it is an interesting future path. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Zoltan Lipini, Organization Sociology at the University of Groningen.
Thank you. Dear candidate, congratulations on your excellent dissertation. I read your work with great interest, and I was really impressed by the effort you put into amassing various data sets which allowed you to study the research puzzle, how gender composition affects organizational and employee outcomes. you use innovative new data and measures, such as Twitter, and with which you can make substantial contributions to the field. My question concerns one of these contributions, in fact, in chapter 4, where you capture a leaky pipeline phenomenon using linked employer-employee register data. And you capture this with a measure of the differential representation of women across pay grades within the firm. So when I read this, I had a little bit of an issue with this measure, and that is this really represent a pipeline? Or isn't it just a reflection of the gender segregated nature of jobs within firms? So let's say women are overrepresented in lower level jobs that are administrative nature, such as pink collar jobs, while men are more likely to be on jobs, professional jobs that indeed have a career path towards management and higher levels of the firms. So in fact, what you capture here might not be a leaky pipeline, but might be related to chapter 3's focus, gender segregation. So I wonder, have you considered this caveat, and how would you defend your measure?
Dear esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. I would defend this measure by saying that indeed this measure captures gender segregation, occupational gender segregation, but also that is a part of the leaky pipeline, that a company has mostly women in lower pay positions and mostly men in higher pay positions does limit the possibility that gender diversity can have these positive effects that we expect, because there's if all women are secretaries and men are in the development or research team, then there is no collaboration of this different human capital, for instance, if we take one of the theories. So this also has to be read as not necessarily like a blame of companies. Maybe there is not a supply of women in certain occupations following this segregation. So I think this is also purposely really a look on the broader scale of to gain this level of gender diversity, that we see that even within this level of occupational segregation, we do see better results for companies that have then slightly higher gender diversity when they can, that there is therefore a purpose in gaining more, less occupational gender segregation, resulting into more gender diversity within companies.
Can I quickly follow up? So that I understand, but then I wonder, doesn't we conflate more structural processes with processes that have to do with internal labor markets and progression within firms? So I wonder if you don't have any, would you consider refining this measure, and how would you refine this measure to still be able to separate these two processes to a certain degree?
I think, maybe the name leaky pipeline is also not especially well chosen, that indeed, the current measure is not exactly about promoting necessarily, but about the current status. I think if you would want to look specifically at the leaky pipeline, this as a measure, so therefore really looking at the flow of a company, it would be advisable to check the life course, the careers of individual people within a company. Of course, that would be hard because usually people make career in different companies, but there's definitely a way that this would be measured.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Frank Curvers, Demographic Transition, Human Capital and Employment at Maastricht University.
Okay, thank you. Dear candidate, the thesis comprises original work on gender equality at the workplace. Although much has been written already on gender equality or inequality, When reading the thesis, I always had the feeling that the chapters really add something interesting to the existing literature. In particular because of either the use of detailed and large micro datasets or the collection of small and innovative self-established datasets. In general, the thesis is very well written, very interesting, original and easy to read. So I would like to congratulate you with this great result. And I hope you will continue your research on gender equality to contribute to a further decline of the gender pay gap between men and women, which is still a serious challenge. I would like to ask you a question on chapter 4, more specifically on a question related to proposition 5. And I will now quote this. Firms with more gender diversity of both the whole firm as well as within different levels of that firm are more gender and more gender equality have better corporate financial performance. So that's your proposition 5. This seems to be a strong business case for companies and also for the thousands of consultants who advise company management. You also mentioned the business case in your introduction. So simply introducing more gender diversity and paying men and women more equally will increase business performance. It seems too good to be true. Why is this not happening? Why do companies resist it? Or if they fail to do so, why are they not outcompeted by other companies that can benefit from this huge business case? So this is these are my main questions and also, in fact, objections. But now the consequences. Could it be that your results are not that strong and that your conclusion assumes a causality that's not there? In fact, you mention on page 126 that you cannot rule out reverse causality. So if you cannot rule out reverse causality, isn't it better to withdraw your proposition 5? I'm curious about your answer.
Thank you, dear highly esteemed opponent. That's a very relevant question. I think this research especially suffers from the possibility of reverse causality. I think, to answer it a little bit in reverse, I think that although there are not many, there are some other studies that look at this, like I did, also with fixed effects and lagged variables to indicate that there is some causality in here. So I'm also a bit careful by saying that I cannot rule out reverse causality, because I feel that we do find indications of that there is an actual timed effect. Apart from that, why it is not happening, I think that is within why is it not happening out of itself. I think that is also within the case itself. Firms are, even though we would like to believe that economists are all rational and always make the most efficient cost-benefit analysis, we are all people and we all suffer from the cultural norms. So following the theories that I also present in the earlier chapters on the discrimination that can be expected towards women and the negative stereotypes, it also means that on the micro level, when male managers hire other people, they are more likely to hire other men. So even if at the top of the companies they are aware of this, might take some time to really trickle through of society because of societal norms, not necessarily because of business goals.
So there's a huge role for you as a management consultant, I guess, to convince firms to make more profits in this way?
If there's a future for, you said?
For your future career, then.
For my future career, well, currently I'm still working at the university, and I have worked as a business consultant. I think I base this also partially on that experience. But yes, I think that there is an argument to say for this. I also don't necessarily think that this has to take place only in the business. Like I said, there are stereotypes and there are different conventions within business, so we can also achieve this through regulative bodies and government regulation. I think a business case cuts both ways. It also means that you can present this to a government and saying, like, if you impose this on companies, and they won't suffer as much as they say they will.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Dr. Wendy Smits, Professor Labor for Market Flexibility, also at Maastricht University.
Thank you. Dear candidate, I join the previous speakers in congratulate you with this very interesting thesis on a very relevant topic. In particular, I think your approach using insight from various disciplines, such as sociology, economics, and data management sciences, is very original. Your use of different type of data sets, such as microdata from Statistics Netherlands, but also big data that you scraped yourself, demonstrates a high proficiency in both data processing and data analysis. Furthermore, I think your thesis is very well structured and clearly written. Nevertheless, I have a question. And my question concerns chapter 3 on the gender wage gap. In this chapter, you study gender composition within and between occupation, wage differences. And you show that only part of the wage differences between female-dominated occupations and male-dominated occupations are explained by specialized human capital, as measured by on-the-job training. And you state that this finding supports the devaluation theory. Furthermore, you find that within occupations, men always earn more than women, but that the wage penalty for working in female-dominated occupations is higher for men than for women, which you take as support for the variable male advantage perspective. Now, I was wondering whether these results could be explained by another factor. And there is one thing that you do not really seem to consider in this chapter, and that is that men and women have different bodies and how this fact might impact the productivity both between and within occupations in female-dominated occupations. More specifically, women consistently report more health issues, including mental health issues, and have a higher absenteeism rate. That's a thing that you address also in chapter 4. So if women have indeed more health problems, and as a good health is considered to be a form of human capital as well, it might affect both their own productivity, but also the productivity of the team, and thus including the productivity of their co-workers. And I got the idea, I was interested in this because it seems that lately trade unions are demanding, are raising awareness on specific female health issues and demanding specific regulations for specific female health related issues, so as menopause workplace policies and sickness leave for monthly periods and those things. And they are even claiming that those issues are not only important for the women themselves, but also for their co-workers. And, well, I'm not aware of any studies that prove that indeed health issues had an impact on co-workers, but if that were true, then my question would be, couldn't your results in chapter 3 not be explained by differences in health between men and women? So I would like to ask you to elaborate on that.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your very interesting question. I can imagine that part of the difference that I now don't observe is partially because of health differences. And that is definitely also something that is interesting to research into future, is an avenue for future research. I think health differences between men and women in labor force is of course not an unstudied field. And like you said, also there's definitely, we know that there are differences in this. I think that also partially why, apart from that I couldn't really take this in a satisfactory level in this analysis, like part why I also don't talk about it so much is that health inequality between men and women is also the result of gender norms and discrimination. So, or at least partially. The women experience more stress generally in the workplace. They have higher responsibilities at home. Even if they work the same as their male partner. So this is a difficult thing to assess when you talk about do men and women get remunerated equally in a job that they do, where they work the same hours, have the same education, etc. And to take an aspect that is also a consequence of the structural inequality that you're trying to observe. So I agree. I think that part of this unexplained variable or unexplained part of the wage gap is partially because of health issues, and I think that that is exactly also the point, and that it falls into the devaluation thesis of discrimination.
Okay, thank you. But with respect to that, the second point is the claim that those health issues might impact on co-workers, so that might impact on male workers as well. What do you think of that argument, and do you have any ideas on how to investigate that claim?
Yes, there is of course a natural, I think that indeed can affect co-workers if there's less productivity or and less high energy, there's things around that can affect co-workers. I think a great way to test that is also to especially look at men in female-dominated occupations, where we can expect a higher variation also in the health between those women, even between the structural effects that are between those occupations or those workplaces. We can expect then men indeed also to report lower on job satisfaction or maybe on productivity measures if there is higher health issues within those occupations or workplaces.
Thank you so much. We have time for a second round, and the second round will be started again online by Professor van der Lippe.
So that you don't hear an echo? Okay. A very short question now. Your study is about the Netherlands, which I find great, but it might be a specific situation because of its part-time work. Would you expect the result to be the same or different in other European countries? Why or why not? Thank you.
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. I think that it's a very important question, especially because that is one of the bigger limits of my research, that it is only in the Netherlands. I think we find the gender wage gap everywhere, and at least in studied countries, usually developed economies, and we find also influence of gender diversity on corporate finance performance across the board. I think that there's definitely differences. The Netherlands is a relatively well-protected labor market, somewhere in between there, if you follow classic classifications. So you can expect to have more similarities with job markets like maybe Denmark than, for example, the US. And there's definitely differences that can expect it there. Mostly, I expect that the effects that I find to be stronger in wage, like that in looser, in more liberal economies in the States, you would probably find, because this is less following collective labor agreements, that women have an even less strong bargaining position. It is also possible that gender diversity has less positive impact when women are not properly supported. We've also already mentioned motherhood. I've mentioned motherhood and pregnancy. It can be a cost for a company to invest in an employee that then they have to pay or support for, or that is not there when there is no childcare available in those cases. So like those kind of regulative and national policies are definitely important. However, as we find similar evidence in all these different countries, I definitely think that it doesn't impact this more than the actual variables that we observe.
Thank you. I wouldn't say it is a limitation, because you cannot do everything in thesis. You discussed the socio-democratic regimes with Denmark, the liberal ones with the US. What about a conservative regime like Italy, maybe Spain? Would it be different there?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I think the conservative regimes generally have lower female participation, labor market participation. We see that women often, they either work full time or they don't work at all. So that definitely changes. Like one of the researches I cited also in the introduction is about the severe state in Italy, also for the loss of human capital by how many highly educated women are at home. So this affects. So I definitely expect stronger effects also in conservative markets, and actually maybe even higher benefits of gender diversity because there's actually so much untapped talent in these markets.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Dr. Lipeny.
Dear candidate, you present a theoretical review of gender composition effects in your dissertation, but this chapter notably omits organizational theoretical perspectives, so the stakeholder theory, signaling theory, and also team diversity and performance literature. But you use these theories in chapters 4 and 5. I'm just curious, why you chose not to review and integrate these perspectives, given that you're interested in firm-level outcomes such as performance?
Thank you, esteemed opponent. That is a very good question. I went into this to try to marry all the different topics together, which my thesis is relatively broad. So I chose to use the broad level theories that you can find across the board in sociology, economics, social psychology, to kind of get a general framework that we can also use to understand and therefore also use together these theories that exist in these different disciplines. So indeed, it has to be read a little bit in between the lines that these organizational theories follow in line with the group dynamics like social identity and stuff, or for example, when we talk about performance or stakeholders, that we are starting to get more into the psychoanalytical theories of different human capitals of different groups. This is not stated as explicitly because I wanted to present a general view at the beginning, and the particular chapters are more aimed at different audiences for the respective disciplines where they are written for, where, for example, the chapter 3 is more of a traditional sociological article, and chapter 4 is more of an economics piece.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Curvers.
Yeah. Okay. Dear candidate, I have another question on that's on chapter 5, and here you find that there is a better performance, a higher corporate financial performance, and market valuation as well of firms that are more gender diverse. my question is, in fact, that better performance, could it be that the better corporate social financial performance, could it be that this is not due to gender diversity as such, but more due to that those firms are better following procedures, regulations, are more sticking to conventions and social norms. So they are, in fact, better organized in all respects, also including gender diversity, and that they therefore outperform other firms. So my question is, in fact, about the mechanism behind the better performance. Are you sure that the better performance is a result of more gender diversity, or could it be that there are other mechanisms behind it?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. I think that it is definitely possible that there's other mechanisms behind this. Indeed, as you say, like a better organized firm might be more gender diverse and therefore also have better corporate financial performance. I think that that indeed gender diversity might only be one of these elements. If I look through the lens of competitive theory, resource dependency theory, I think that it also shows that gender diversity is actually relatively hard to replicate. So it might indeed need a well-organized firm to actually make that happen, to find the good people among the different genders. So it is potentially true that that gender diversity is an indicator of other organizational forces. I think that still means that gender diversity is some of a good indicator. And I think that there's also some indications of some lower level research or more focused, more micro level research on teams where there's more gender diversity, where I expect those governance and regulatory issues of firms are less at play. So I definitely think there's indications of both things. I think that even though it would probably not the only mechanism, it is a very interesting mechanism to also have an indication of performance.
Thank you. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Smits.
Thank you. Dear candidate, I have a follow-up question on the relation between productivity and health that we just discussed. And I was wondering, and one of your recommendations in chapter 3 is the use of gender quota to solve the problem of the wage gaps. But suppose that part of the wage difference and parts of the results that you found in that chapter are indeed related to productivity differences due to health differences. Would you then still think it would be a good idea to have gender quota, or might there be other policies advisable in that case that would be better for women?
Dear highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. I would say yes. I still think quota are a good solution for this. Actually, particularly for this, also because this is a way of putting that potentially lower productivity or potentially higher or definitely higher health problems of women onto companies and the labor market rather than on the personal sphere. If companies and occupations are gender diverse and a part of that population has higher health problems, then it is in the collective need of both governments and companies to fix these health problems. So this might also actually result into social, better social, how do you say that? Progress.
So you think then there will be, so instead of having direct policies aimed at labor conditions for men and women, you would advise to have gender balances in firms so that you have an indirect effect, so that firms themselves decide to change their policy. That's
Absolutely, yeah. I think that there's also something to say for different policies for women. Men don't get pregnant. Like there are differences between the sexes in this, and so of course there is something to say for that. I am not so comfortable with saying that because this is not what my research is about. But So I am generally more of a proponent of just getting that equality in there and then thinking that it will solve, it will create a situation that therefore needs to be solved, then thinking to get to gender equality through different policies of men and women. Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Wyatt.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm also going to carry on what can be done, because clearly there's still work to be done to improve the position of women in the Dutch labour market and their pay. And in Chapter 5, you refer to one of my favourite chatbots, the gender pay gap chatbot. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, it's a British-based thing, and what it does really comes into its own on the 8th of March, International Women's Day, and it generates automatic responses to any company, I think with more than 250 employees, that boasts on social media about how much the company does for women, blah, blah, blah. And the bot automatically searches the available government data, I guess the equivalent to data provided by CBS here, and posts something about the pay gap. So it says something like, well, in this organization, actually the women's median hourly pay is 40% lower than men's, despite what you've just posted on social media. Now, I'm kind of curious about, maybe it's another future occupation for you. Would something like this be useful in the Netherlands, and how would it work? Because in Chapter 5, you talk about both the kind of positive and the negative examples, that you have companies who boast about these things and actually they don't have much to boast about, and you have companies that do actually have, really good kind of equality of pay and opportunities, but don't kind of use social media to good effect. So I suppose my question is sort of twofold, really. What would be, how could we use social media effectively to kind of promote, both for firms to kind of promote their own kind of good things, but also to call out those who are kind of overclaiming? And given the current state of the company we used to call Twitter, which I don't think we can count on for achieving equality of any sort, how would we actually arrange this?
And dear highly esteemed woman, that is a very elaborate question, but a very good one. And I think I do have an answer. I think that research not only on gender diversity, but also especially on wage differences really shows that transparency is vital. So I think that generally being transparent, that obliging companies to be transparent in these kind of things is absolutely vital. Companies can now still pretend to be a certain way and really make their image in their own and how they want it. And I think that a good way to force gender equality into this is also forcing them to be transparent somehow. There are some regulations on this in the EU. Like, this is also where I use the data on those sustainability reports. They are severely lacking. There is no standard. Large firms are only required to report on something about equality and put some gender in there if you can. So I think that more standards on this would definitely be important. Regarding social media, I think also we can follow general rules on misinformation, which we also see with what was policy of Twitter, that with COVID misinformation, there was a little label on there with like, well, this might not be true. So I think that there's definitely possibilities for there. Can we trust social media companies to do that themselves? I don't think so. But I think we could enforce some regulations on that through, for example, the EU.
Or is there a role for the CBS here?
In the Netherlands, definitely. In the Netherlands, absolutely, because the CBS has this data. It is not something that they are currently allowed to make public, although for companies larger than 30 people, they would be able to, in the current legal framework. So I think that this is definitely something that, especially with the growth of social media and more engaging consumers, this would be something that is very interesting, a role for the CBS, indeed, yes. Thank you.
I'm looking at the clock. It is on this clock 11 o'clock, so the event should come in any moment. Of course, we can go online again, but then you will not be able to answer the question. So it is almost time's up. Tang, do you want to still?
Sure. Now we're getting at the time-filling stage. I had lots of questions. Another one which I think has come up in different sorts of ways is the question of intersectionality and the difficulties of, you've said, and done in various of the more detailed empirical analyses, controlled for all sorts of things, but we know that we're not only our gender, other important, identity markers come into play, like ethnicity and migration status and age, that are all really important in terms of our kind of salaries and opportunities in the labor market. And I was wondering if you thought about, both about the availability of the data and the methodological challenges of really kind of seriously dealing with intersectionality for the kinds of questions that you've addressed in the 12 seconds you now have before the...
Dear Hallie Bowen, thank you for your questions. Yes, I definitely consider to look also more into intersectionality, and one of the reasons why I did not do that further is because the availability of data. Identity is obviously vastly complex, and one reason also to look specifically at gender is because it's so neatly 50-50 percentage of the population.
Thank you so much, Joey Tang. The time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and of your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side. 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. All your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. To the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. What's on the line? I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
Joey Tang, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and of your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant upon you the degree of doctor. Professor Smeets is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Belooft u dat u altijd volgens de beginselen van wetenschappelijke integriteit te werk zult gaan, eerlijk en zorgvuldig, transparant, onafhankelijk en verantwoordelijk.
Ja, dat beloof ik.
Krachtens de bevoegdheid ons door de wet toegekend, volgens het besluit van de commissie hier tegenwoordig, verklaar ik hier bij u, Joey Tang, tot dokter te bevorderen en alle rechten te verlenen die daaraan volgens de wet en gewoonte zijn verbonden. Ten bewijze hiervan overhandig ik nu de bul door rector, secretaris en overige leden van de promotiecommissie, ondertekend en met het grootzegel van de universiteit bevestigd. Gefeliciteerd. En nu gaan we over tot een praatje. Het moet in 6 minuten, heb ik begrepen. We zullen zien. Dear Joey, dear Dr. Joey, congratulations. Congratulations not only with this big achievement, which is this PhD study, but also with your very, very clear presentation of your research and the way you addressed the questions during this defense. Perfect, excellent. Well done, Joey. You demonstrated why your supervisors, Isabella, Sophie, and I, and other members of the committee were right to select you for this position in May 2018. For this PhD topic, gender inequality, we had many female applicants. But after your interview, our choice was immediately clear. And I remember very well that in the evaluation of your interview, one of the committee members raised her voice and said, "Hire him, hire him." And I also do remember that the invitation for your interview had been sent to the wrong person. Ultimately, you received the invitation only 2 days before, in which you were asked to produce a research proposal on that topic. And you managed perfectly. You started in September 2018. What a long time ago it seems. The PhD project was initiated as a result of the flagship project of the cooperation between Maastricht University and Statistics Netherlands, CBS, on projects related to big data. One of the flagships focused on the sustainability development goals, the SDGs, but we needed funding. and we found funding. Your PhD project was partly funded by the Center of Big Data Statistics, of which Sophie de Broe was that time the director of the Center of Big Data Statistics. And my own department on labor, income, and quality of life statistics. They also contributed, and of course, university. And we were lucky that we could work together with Isabella Grabner from the faculty of SBE of Maastricht. Based on Isabella's knowledge on gender inequality within firms, combined with our knowledge on CBS data, the PhD project was created, Gender Inequality and Big Data. This topic, however, was still very, very broad. And Joey, you managed to focus on specific issues and research questions related to gender inequality in companies and the use of the very fascinating and rich data of the CBS. And that was not easy. You always had to make choices between the theories, the applied methods, and the data. And on top of that, in 2020, in March, we had Corona. We all know, don't you? Yeah. And so we had to cope with that. You had to cope with that, and all the lockdowns, and also there were other things. You live in Brussels, so not that on a very near distance from Maastricht. And one of your supervisors, Isabella, got a very nice position in Vienna. So immediately after you started your PhD, or even before that. So the Zoom meetings already entered in your PhD period before we had no idea of the upcoming pandemic. And last Wednesday, we had another chat, again, of course, Zoom, and you told me that you never had had the opportunity to meet in person, you together with your supervisors. All Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. But despite on all these difficulties, you, Joey, you produced such a splendid piece of academic scholarship. I continue. Also, we talked about your progress in the last 2 years of your PhD. It was always such a pleasure to read your drafts, so well written. And in your presentation, like also today, you do this in such a convincing and calm manner. And this brings me to your basic attitude. You always stay calm. You always listen carefully to what others tell you, and then you go on with your work. Is that also at home? But so you are very efficient, but I also hear this from many other people, especially your students. And they say that you are such a great teacher. And one example is that during one of my courses, one student responded, "Oh, Joey, he is so great, he is so cool." We are confident that you will have a fascinating career. You responded in your first year in a magazine from a university that you wanted to become a professor. So I had myself some mixed feelings about a mix, but now I would say, yeah, why not? You have the skills. Why not go for that? And At present, you are employed at the Department of Sociology of Utrecht University, surrounded by a very nice and good group of people, such as Professor Maas and Professor Vrooman, who's here. Thank you for coming. And your research has many things in common in what you did during your PhD. Again, you are using surveys. Now you are using the list panel. And you combine this with admin data from the CBS. So this looks, again, a very nice challenge to do. Well, Joey, look at the clock. Let me finalize. Also on behalf of Isabella and Sophie, by congratulating you with this thesis. Your PhD came in the same year Claudia Goldin received her Nobel Prize for her work on the same topic, gender inequality. So perhaps times are changing. We are all confident that you, Joey, are a real feminist who wants to change the world for better, reflected in the very nice title of your dissertation, Together We Stand, and a very nice cover. We also want to congratulate your parents, your grandparents, and your fiancée, Julia. Without the support of your family, writing the thesis of the bridge too far, we are grateful that we have this Dr. Joey among us all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Dear Dr. Tang, sounds good, huh? Dear Dr. Tang, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you have acquired. Congratulations and enjoy. And speaking of which, we will all go to celebrate Dr. Tang, Joey's great achievement at the Vrijthof at the Café de Momos. And now we will still take pictures with the young doctor, but I ask you already to go to the Vrijthof. Congratulations and have a great day.